exactly what Susan had mentioned, which was to sort of give you an update on what is now 23 years of history of the Maine Woods Initiative, and just its impact in the really not just the state of Maine, but truly the Northeast, and something that I think all of you, as longtime AMC folks, hopefully will feel just as proud as we do about the work here and what it means for the Northeast. So as you've all, we dove in tonight with the start of the meeting focused on this exact topic, which is this fact that AMC, since its inception as an organization, has really been about being at the epicenter of people and the outdoors. And you all do that every day in your actions and your work with AMC by facilitating relationships everywhere that you enjoy these great outdoor landscapes and get to share them with other people that have like-minded interests and facilitate new connections to these places. And that really sets us apart from a lot of other conservation organizations, because we take such a people-centric view of the work that we engage in. And many of you know because you've lived this cycle, this theory of change personally, but the organization has been based around, from its earliest days, almost fully 150 years ago, that if you get people out on landscapes and get them falling in love with these places through recreation and developing connections to other people, that they become conservationists and they want to take care of these spaces and share them with other people. And that's continued to sustain us for, over a century and a half. So many of you will already know that one of the clear major initiatives that the organization was founded on was the passage of the Weeks Act in 1911, which ultimately created the policy ecosystem to start the Eastern National Forest System. Prior to the passage of the Weeks Act, the federal government was constitutionally barred from acquiring land east of the Mississippi River and had sold much of the land that it once owned east of the Mississippi. And with the passage of the Weeks Act, that opened the gateway to every eastern national forest that we now have across the full eastern half of the United States. And from our earliest days, AMC developed these techniques to turn recreationists into conservationists by doing exactly what you all are doing today, getting people outdoors, falling in love with these places, and then acting to protect them and to share that with other people. And that work in the whites, we now know we have a different word for. We call it landscape scale conservation. That was a brand new term that hadn't been coined yet, and that blossomed to over 800,000 acres of conserved land in the whites. And AMC's been leading the way in conserving other landscapes and aiding in other conserved landscapes from Virginia to Maine. We're in the middle of trying to tally the totality of the conservation efforts that AMC's been involved with. And at least by the count we have now, we think that the Appalachian Mountain Club over 150-year history has been involved with over 2 million acres of conservation from Virginia to Maine. Specifically, when you zoom into what's going on here in northern Maine, the story is somewhat unique. The state of Maine is the single largest, most forested state in the nation at 89% forested. It's also a state that's heavily privately owned. About 95% of the state of Maine is privately owned. But what you see on the slide in front of you, all of the townships, those are individual townships, those little squares, are the ones that are in color are townships within the unorganized territories of our state. So over half the state of Maine is disorganized in that there's no organized municipalities. All of those colored areas of the state are governed as one large municipality. Collectively, though, that 10.4 million acre forest is home to about 17,000 people, so it's extremely remote. And for going on about 300 years, it's been managed for commercial forest products. We started commercially managing the forests of Maine in the 1630s with the first sawmill built in North America. Specifically, what you're seeing in the slide here is perhaps what's been the most turbulent period that's continuing to today in our forest history here in Maine, whereby in 1994, all the shades in red were vertically integrated pulp and paper companies that owned both land and mills, and in many cases had owned that land for over 100 years. By 2005, you see a much more prevalence of blue, and that indicates landowners who are either REITs, which are real estate investment trusts, or TIMOs, timber investment management organizations. And those are financial vehicles that don't have a connection with a mill and often are absentee owners. And so that turnover fundamentally challenged one of the core tenets of life here in Maine, which is public access to private land. Our societies were built on that concept of public access to these privately held lands, and as new owners came into view, that was fundamentally threatened. Where I'm calling to you from tonight is my home in Willimantic. We are an organized town, but not by much. When I was born, we were 89 people here. Now we're about 110, so not huge. But this town, Willimantic, has been sold 4 times in my lifetime. And so, these are real. These land sales have devastating impacts on the local communities because you literally don't know if you're going to have access to these places anymore, where we've drawn our livelihoods from for so long. So out of this chaos came this concept that Walter Graff, our senior vice president at the time, and Andy Fallender, president at the time, led the board through that, perhaps AMC could take a more active role in conserving these places and use the lessons that we've learned in supporting the Eastern National Forests to build a new model for conservation, where we would develop new outdoor recreation destinations, do it at a landscape scale, practice responsible forest management as a way to actually restore forested landscapes. We'll get to more of that in a minute. And make sure that we could talk succinctly and concretely about the economic benefits that conservation has for local communities. And from that, we created what was and still is largely a very unique approach to owning conservation land, where, Mark, Patricia, and I all work for AMC, the 501c3
So
nonprofit,
romantic.
but we own a wholly owned subsidiary, which is the land, an LLC, and that's so that the land itself stays on the tax rolls and operates in a very predictable way for the local economy. Now, I do want to take a step back because it's important to give a sense of scale to what exactly the challenges that we all as conservationists are facing today. So I don't know how many of you in your daily lives talk much about the temperate deciduous mixed forest biome, but it's the biome that I guarantee, or I would be willing to wager, most of you have spent the majority of your lives living within, and yet all of us, including myself, know very little about it. But yet, as you can see on this map, it covers the entire eastern half of the United States, most of the Maritimes of Canada, Western Europe, spreading into the central steppes, crops up again in Asia. And if you think about and overlay a map of the world's wealth, this is largely the biome that has generated the vast majority of the wealth of the world and established both Eastern and Western societies. And yet we know so little about it as in our daily lives. Many people can name all of the other biomes except this one. And one of the main reasons for that is exactly what you see here. This is a map of the existing remnants of this biome. And by that, I mean the elements of the biome that are left that carry with it full ecosystem functionality. The single largest intact patch of this entire biome left anywhere in the world is here in northern Maine, that 10.4 million acre forest we have in the northern half of our state. So it truly is a globally significant forest, and it truly is a priceless ecological relic that we're so fortunate to be able to still have with us today. If you look at that region through multiple other lenses, here's a map of the night sky of the eastern half of the United States. And this map can tell you a number of things. But I specifically like to reference it because it shows really very clearly the just how close so many people are in the eastern half of the United States to this great place, to this massive unbroken forest. So you can also think of this as a socioeconomic map of places where people are wealthy enough to leave the lights on. So much of the country is dark. So it's a pretty telling story of the ability for people to actually interact both with these big open spaces and experience the night sky at the same time. Zooming in a little closer, you can see in that blue circle how the 100-mile wilderness, where AMC's work is focused, really is conserving the bleeding edge of development into the interior of that unbroken forest. And so it is anchoring the southern end of that 10.4 million acre globally significant forest. So I just mentioned the 100-mile wilderness. It's this region that's really defined by the tops of the Appalachian Mountains, the last 100 miles of the Appalachian Trail. You can see that cutting through the central part of that map. And it's rimmed by these service communities, Greenville, Monson, Guilford, Dover, Foxcroft, Milo, Brownville Junction, that have depended on this big region. That it's the region itself is just over 1 million acres in size for with everything you have on that map. And just for scale, you'll see Moosehead Lake extending north out of Greenville. That's about 42 miles long in length. It's the largest lake in New England. And and just as you should expect this from an organization like the AMC, but it's a region that has a deep and rich human history. And to put this into sort of to perspective, the this landscape was a heavily glaciated landscape as much of the eastern seaboard. There's been people on this landscape since the recession of the glaciers for about 12,000 years. And so what we're left with today is a forest that is actually about 7,000 years old. It took about 4,000 years to develop the forest after the glaciers receded. And what that means is that the Wabanaki people of this place literally watched the forest grow up around them. So there's never been a time in the history of this place where there hasn't been people in this forest. And so the forest that we have left today is as much a memorial to the stewardship of the Wabanaki people as it is anything else. And that's a lot of what we're working to restore today is that connection to place that for those Wabanaki communities that are still here with us. So Susan alluded to this, but we've been busy at it since 2003. We started acquiring the Katahdin Ironworks tract from International Paper and then have built out from there. So as of September 2025, after we closed on the southern half of the Barnard Forest, we are now up to actually 127,000 acres here in the 100-mile wilderness that AMC owns outright and has permanently conserved. We were incredibly fortunate to receive just a astoundingly amazing gift from the MathWorks Corporation to help us finish that Barnard acquisition, which we're so grateful for. And that's meant that we acquired that 28,000 acre Barnard Forest about 2 years early, and has given us the confidence to push on into broader conservation work here in the Maine Woods region. And we'll go into some more of that in detail. But what this has meant is that AMC is now positioned to work from the tops of these mountains along the Appalachian mountain chain, downriver to the sea, down to the main stems of these major rivers that flow on into Penobscot Bay, about 150 river miles south. And I mentioned this earlier, but AMC's been doing other work in Maine to kind of push the initiative across the full breadth of the state. And so in 1994, Maine was leading the nation in conservation and private lands conservation with a total of about 1.1 million acres. Today, we're up over about 4,400,000 acres of conservation, with AMC directly participating in about 1.3 million acres, or about 30% of the total acres conserved in the state since 1994. So on the property, we're good AMC trail builders, right? So since 2003, we've built 130 miles of trail, about 92 miles of groomed cross-country ski trail, which are in full swing right now. So you should come on up and take a ski. And it's a full mixed-use bag out there of hiking, single track, mountain bike trails, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, portage and canoe trails, 16 paddle to campsites that were all built by volunteers of the Maine chapter and others, 24 drive-to campsites, and over 300 miles of gravel biking across the AMC's road network. We operate 3 lodges, Little Lyford Lodge in the center of the property on Lyford Pond 1 and Pond 2 on the west branch of the Pleasant River. Little Lyford is actually the oldest continually operating sporting camp in the state of Maine. In Maine, we call them sporting camps, but everywhere else you would know of them as a lodge. That's been in continuous operation since 1872. Gorman Chairback is just down the valley from Little Lyford. That's been run as a sporting camp since about the 1890s. And Meadow-Whistler is our most recent fully renovated property that we reopened to the public in 2017, and that's been run as a sporting camp since the 1950s, and that's on the far northern end of the property up on Second Roach Pond. And we're pleased to have also pushed a broader initiative that has really done a great job at promoting the full region beyond just AMC's ownership for the 100 Mile Wilderness, as with the establishment of the first International Dark Sky Park in New England on the AMC lands. And we'll be looking to add more acreage to that International Dark Sky Park as time goes on. So as we mentioned, we've bought all of this land from former industrial timber landowners, and most of those industrial timber landowners were practicing industrial even-aged forest management, which you see an example of here in this aerial photograph of our neighbors. And you can see the big patches of clear cuts, and those clear cuts are then replanted in some cases or left for natural regeneration, and those trees grow up all in the same age class and are usually of the same species. And that's just simply not how these forest ecosystems were meant to work. And so AMC has been using forest management as a restoration technique to develop late successional, uneven aged forest management structures. And so this is an aerial photograph taken about the same time of a hillside on MWI where we've actually harvested every acre in that photograph you see. And if I zoom in a little bit further, you can see those little green machines down by the side of the road. Those are actually about 35 tons a piece. Those are pretty big pieces of logging equipment. But what's important in this photograph is that you can see that what we're trying to do is to break up these forests that are basically essentially even-aged conditions, multiple species in most cases, but even-aged condition to create gaps for both scarification, where the equipment actually roughs up the forest soil to prepare it for seed beds of native seeds that come from the remaining trees. So we'll be adding new age classes to these forests to get them back into an older condition with much larger trees that have the opportunity to live out their full lifespans through time. So this is a long-range restoration project for sure. We don't do that everywhere. We've set aside really the best acres for ecological reserves. So areas that had intact habitat, that had older trees that were protecting critical habitat elements like the riparian zones or entire valleys, we set those aside as no harvest ecological reserves. And those have set solid benchmarks to compare our forest management activities against. So the blue line you see on this graph is the increase in carbon stocking over time on our ecological reserve lands, again, with no timber harvesting. Below that, you can see the lower starting point for lands that we chose to use restoration management techniques on, which we now use for forest management. And the important thing to note on this graph is that the rate of carbon sequestration and carbon accumulation by those two different management approaches is parallel, which means that we're mimicking natural processes with our forest management activities, which is a good sign and a good reassurance that our management activities are on track. The property itself is also really, truly a living landscape scale laboratory, and the research team has done a tremendous job at attracting a huge variety of partners doing all kinds of work, from watershed monitoring to carbon monitoring to climate sensors to wildlife work, all to kind of understand at a landscape scale in real time the effects of climate change on both forest management and on forests of the Northeast. And we're very grateful for a wide array of partners. Sort of one of the central themes of a lot of our work here in the MWI region is the watershed restoration work that we've been engaged with. So the shaded area of the state that you see is the largest watershed here in Maine, the Penobscot River, which is about 5 million acres in size and is currently home to one of the only Atlantic salmon, sea-run Atlantic salmon populations left in the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. In addition to that, you'll see below the Atlantic salmon, this big silverfish up top. Right below that is the eastern brook trout. The eastern brook trout has experienced a pretty sad tale that I'm sure many of you in Pennsylvania can relate to. Since about 1950, eastern brook trout habitat, which extends all the way down into the Carolinas historically, has receded such that today 90% of the remaining eastern brook trout habitat left in the United States is in the state of Maine. And what's about 90% of what's in the state of Maine is in the unorganized territories, with the vast majority of it in the 100 Mile Wilderness region. So it's a massive, massive reduction in the habitat of that critical fish, just really in one lifetime. Another view of these watersheds, The pink areas are showing the historic extent of Atlantic salmon habitat. The crosshatch areas are the critical areas of habitat that are possible, that are where there's the potential exists to restore access to those watersheds if dams are removed and other barriers to fish passage are able to be removed. And then you can see underlaid there is the MWI properties in green at the upper ends of this watershed.
Mm.
There we are in purple. So viewed another way, this is a map showing the potential mapped habitat of the entire Penobscot watershed, and you can see the MWI lands in that orange circle. And if you notice on the right-hand side, that's showing the efforts of about a 20-year project to remove two main stem dams in the Penobscot, the VZ Dam and the Great Works Dam. You can just see the text there. And I should note too, Mark's heavily involved in a lot of dam removal projects nationally through his leadership of the Hydropower Coalition. So Mark can speak to a lot of this work in way more detail than I can. And Mark should be commended for the work that he does to get these projects over the finish line. But what you're seeing there is the ability now for sea-run fish, because of the removal of those dams, to actually reach inland for the first time in 180 years. So we now have sea-run Atlantic salmon, lamprey, and alewives 150 river miles inland for the first time. There's no living memory left of when the last time these fish were here. And so it's truly incredible to be able to do that and be a part of that work. So watershed restoration has played an active role in actually our acquisition efforts too. We've been actively trying to acquire and permanently conserve entire watersheds. And I'll speak to some recent success, but we've been very lucky in being able to piece together adjoining properties to save these watersheds. In a nutshell,
Mm.
some of the problems that we face on land that we own for fish passage to finish the job have to do with culverts, road culverts. We have over 550 miles of road on AMC land, and a lot of those roads have a ton of culverts. And if you're a fish, this is nothing like anything you've experienced in your natural habitat. You have a hard time jumping up into these orifices, and then steel's not a very nice thing to swim across if you're a smooth-bellied brook trout. So these present real barriers for downstream fish to get to critical spawning habitat in the high elevation areas of the property. So what we've been doing in earnest for a long time now is remove those barriers and replacing them with open bottom structures that provide both climate resilient infrastructure that can handle much larger weather events that we've been seeing in spades. Just anecdotally, I've been connected to this property now in a management role for 14 years, and we've had three 25-year storm events in that 14-year period. So weather's getting crazier, and these bridges help facilitate that as well as let the fish get back to where they need to for spawning. And they're there now. That's the other remarkable thing. A lot of restoration work that we see done today is done in absence of the species you're trying to return to the landscape. And we have this unique opportunity to really to do something for these fish while they're still here, which is the cheapest form of restoration rather than trying to kind of work from scratch. So to date, we've done 168 fish passage projects, which has reconnected 162 miles of stream, which has largely resulted in one of the largest watershed restoration projects in the nation. So what's next? So we didn't let moss gather too quickly after we closed on the Barnard Forest property there on the southern end of the MWI region. We were approached by an anonymous conservation buyer to see if we could work a deal with the owners of the Whitecap Highlands Forest you see there in the center of the map. That's about a 29,000 acre property, 29,800 acres. And over the course of last year, I was successfully able to acquire that 29,000 acre property on behalf of that anonymous conservation funder. That funder took it into ownership in October for 22 million, with the intent to give that property to the AMC once we raise 15 million to both restore the watersheds there on that property and reopen public access by rebuilding roads that were in bad shape, and put a significant amount of money in the endowment to make sure that this isn't a drain on the finances of the organization into the future. AMC will be managing the property in the interim. We've taken that property into management now while we work to raise the money. And we have about till 2029 to raise those funds. And things are looking good for us to be able to hopefully close that project out early. Once we've successfully acquired that, that will bring AMC's ownership to about 157,000 acres. And it's incredibly humbling to be a part of that process. And, it's reflecting back over the 23-year history. When AMC set out on this project back in 2003, the board had set a goal of owning 100,000 acres in 100 years. And so to be, staring down 157,000 acres now, about 23 years in, is just truly astounding. So I'm hoping, yeah, here we go. Okay. The forest itself is critically important part of the 100-mile wilderness region. We'll be looking to establish about 8,000 acres of ecological reserves that will be where there'll be no timber harvesting taking place because those are critical high elevation forests and expanded riparian zones. The property was closed to public access about 3 years ago, so we'll be reopening this property. And just to give you some perspective on what that means to have a property of 29,000 acres in size closed to public access, 29,000 acres is 3 times the size of the city of Boston in landmass. So this really is impactful to communities to be able to go back on these landscapes that we've had access to for decades. It's a keen property for late successional forest restoration. So we'll be employing a lot of the same techniques you've seen in earlier slides on this property for the long term. And it will mean permanent conservation for the entire west and middle branch of the Pleasant River. We will have permanently conserved and owned the entirety of those 2 watersheds for Atlantic salmon and eastern brook trout. And it gives us the opportunity to reopen about another 50 miles of stream habitat for those watersheds. So I do have a little bit of a video that gives you some aerial views of the property. So I'm hoping the sound comes through. So we'll see. Let me know if you can hear this. Traveling around northern Maine, you'll see this direct link between people and ecology. The opportunity to permanently conserve the
Steve, my sound cut out. Everyone else.
Yeah, mine cut out also shortly after it started.
Steve, maybe you need to unmute.
I see run fish. So it's this rare opportunity to permanently conserve
Better.
this entire valley.
One of the things that I love most about being here in Maine is that you do get to pick your own adventure here and you can hike, bike, and maybe ski depending on what season that you come in, all from one area. A busy trail day for us, maybe be seeing 10 people on the trail. So it's really you as some local wildlife and your friend that you decided to bring along.
At its core, the AMC is about people in the outdoors. And there's really no better project that encompasses all that the AMC is than the Maine Woods Initiative, where we get to live out our values at landscape scale and bring both people and ecology home. Well, hopefully you all could hear that. Not sure if that came through, but yeah, that's what I've got for you tonight. So I'm happy to take questions, and I appreciate you all suffering through another version of me talking at you in the middle of the presentation. So Really appreciate everybody's time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you.